Hello. Hello. Happy Wednesday. Hang on, my monitors are like flip flop. That's gonna bother me. Welcome. Welcome back to Silly Goose Book Club. It's Silly Goose Book Club solo edition. So this might be a little chill, relaxed, funky, fresh, casual. Also, I think this is the first live. Sorry I've been like absent for the last month, first of all. We've got some ground to cover. But I think this is the first live show with the new office. We recently like rearranged everything and all the furniture. So now the office, new office, is what used to be the bedroom and vice versa. So this is looking different. That is why Sunday is still crying. She'll probably be eating her breakfast shortly. But this is also a better view for Sunday if she would just get in her bed. Get over here. There she is. Um, welcome to book club. This is one ghostly Wesley hand. Hello. Gang is all here. Welcome. Hello. Paige is here. We are Live, Laugh, Loving. We're talking about Phaedra, which is so funny because I think Sunday is really going to steal the show today. This was the March book club pick, and it just got pushed back and pushed back. I just finished the book like a few days ago. I was traveling the week before that, and so all of a sudden it was like, oh my god, we just need to unpack a chat finally about Phaedra. So hopefully, it hasn't completely left your brain if you did read it in March, like a good little silly goose. I was a naughty silly goose in this case, but that's okay. We're also doing book club tomorrow for April's book, which is the Bandit Queens. So it's a little back-to-back book club action this week. I always do this. I feel like I bring my book and then hold it up. It just feels like I have to have it with me. This is the book. It just came out, but went straight to paperback. I have yet to take my little sticker off. And what I love about it, that I just noticed like 10 minutes ago, is that this copy has discussion questions in the back. So depending how we go, they're there if we need them. Like we might need discussion questions, we might not. I have a super official little scratch list of some things I know I want to discuss, and then I also have like the Wikipedia pages open of some of the original myths that it's inspired by for like comparison sake. So we're just gonna see where the wind takes us on Phaedra. I think we'll start with this. Let me know if you're here, if you rated it, what your general thoughts were. I'm feeling a 3 stars, which is just it felt like it was okay as far as a Greek retelling goes. Um, it didn't really blow my mind. I think I might have hyped it up a little bit, but I'm going with the 3 stars. There wasn't anything I particularly could point to and say I didn't like that, but it just didn't feel like, wow, what a great retelling to me. And I've read so many wow, great retelling books that that's a hard thing to land to be a 5 star retelling for me. But a 3 star is nothing to sneeze at. Binged it on audio today, but only retained a small bit. I Okay, see, I feel this too. I finished it. I also read it on audio, which was so nice because I definitely would be pronouncing everything incorrectly had I not read it on audio. So that was super helpful. But I just feel like a lot of it wasn't very memorable. So maybe that's the 3 star thing too, is like it just isn't going to stick around with me very long. There's a couple really specific things that I liked about it, but the rest was like it was okay. But I think there's lots to discuss while it's rather fresh, but it's like okay. I'm feeling a 3 also. Okay. The experience I had with this one. Yeah. And I don't know what other like retellings in particular like you have read and loved, Paige, but it's hard not to compare. And I know that Ariadne, which I haven't read but I own, the character Ariadne like came up in this book as the sister of Phaedra. And I now am like desperate to go and read that book because I've heard such great things about Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. Like I could picture the cover in my head. I've heard that's a really great read, and so now having the context of like this story, the sister's story, Ariadne is only in this book so briefly in the beginning that I would love to now know like her side of everything. But I don't know, just not my favorite Greek retelling, but also not the worst that I've read. So it's really truly right in the middle. I finished my first book in a month and a half and very confidently thought I could smash this out in a day. Nice. Sounds like we've successfully shattered the reading slump, if you feel like it was reading slump. I felt like I read like 2 books, maybe 1 or 2 books in April. It's just like that time of year where things are just going so fast. I don't know how it's already the middle of May. Like that is outrageous. But I feel like I'm slowly getting through all of these like little obligations that I have set for myself, like one at a time. One at a time. Your first retelling. This was my first retelling, but it's definitely been something I've wanted to dive into. And while this wasn't spectacular, I'm interested in trying another one. Yes. What a place to start. What a place to start. I found it surprisingly heavy, heavier than I was expecting, but delivered in a very like almost like clinical way, like because there is this like trial for such a large part of it. Like the middle third of the book is this trial, and I just was very matter of fact for the subject matter. It's been a rough year for me reading wise. We're coming back. Yeah, we're not even at the halfway point. You know, there's plenty of time. There is plenty of time yet for reading goals, which is like, now that I say that, I couldn't tell you what my reading goals really were for this year. I know I made them. I'm scared to go check what they were. I do this every year. I make a bunch of reading goals in the beginning of the year, and then it's like immediately forget them. But that's a problem for like December when I go back and reflect on everything. But you know, that's a whole separate live show probably. Before I really talk about Phaedra itself, this is like a part of the Greek myth collection that I'm not very familiar with. So I went and looked up some like basic summaries of the different myths that are involved, especially Phaedra herself, because she's like the glue, kind of like she has like Ariadne is her sister, and I know Ariadne's name more than probably the rest of them, but also Theseus or Theseus in the audiobook, Hippolytus, Poseidon, who was the other, and the Minotaur, Minos, the Minotaur. Like those are all things I'm more familiar with than Phaedra herself. So I looked this up, where we have a traditional version of Phaedra, the myth of Phaedra, and then an alternate version of the myth of Phaedra. And it's interesting reading these because I feel like the threads of the retelling are there, but it's like the retelling version of like believe women, like believe victims of abuse, where the traditional myth is like she quote unquote falsely accused Hippolytus of rape, and then this retelling is like the actual instances that led to the trial, etc., etc. So this being considered like a feminist retelling with like the women at the center of the story was interesting to me. I really appreciated like those perspectives. But I do want to read this traditional version. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Sometimes it's funky with like links, but we'll see. Or if it's like 1,000 pages long. No, I feel like that worked. Okay. So the traditional version of the myth, according to our friend Wikipedia, is Phaedra is the primary cause of misfortune in the tale. The story goes that Phaedra, who is the mother of 2 sons, falls in love with her stepson Hippolytus, which is Theseus's son by another woman who is supposedly the queen of the Amazons. And then Phaedra sets out to entice Hippolytus. And then it's in this version exactly why Hippolytus rejects Phaedra, if not simply because he's her stepson, but Phaedra becomes humiliated when Hippolytus refuses her. So then, according to the traditional version, afraid of the consequences that may befall her if Theseus learns about her actions, Phaedra lies to her husband Theseus that Hippolytus tried to rape her. This angers Theseus, who immediately curses his son with one of 3 wishes granted to him by Poseidon, the god of the sea, because Theseus is apparently the son of Poseidon. Like, everyone is the son of a god in the story. At the request of Theseus to kill Hippolytus, Poseidon summons a huge bull that rises from the sea and scares Hippolytus's horses into a frenzy that dragged Hippolytus to his death. In one rendition of the story, Hippolytus's name is translated to the one torn apart by horses. That is so hardcore. It's so hardcore. In the end, Phaedra's treachery is somehow discovered. It is unclear how, and to avoid a more painful death, she decides to take her own life. That's the traditional Wikipedia version. It is intense. Intense. Like, dang. So then the alternative version, according to Wikipedia, my English teacher would be up in arms right now that we're using Wikipedia for our source, but I digress. So the alternative version. In this version of the story, Phaedra has a reputation of a virtuous queen and is not entirely responsible for her actions. She gets caught in the crossfire between Hippolytus and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. This narrative requires a little background on an earlier conflict between Hippolytus and Aphrodite. Hippolytus is a devout follower of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and among other things, the goddess of chastity. And as a result, he hails her, Artemis, as the greatest of all deities, and in a show of devotion to honor the goddess, Hippolytus vows eternal chastity, swearing that he will never love or marry. And this offends Aphrodite, who is regularly worshipped by all in Greek mythology. And in an attempt to punish Hippolytus, the goddess of love curses his stepmother Phaedra to fall madly in love with him. So already this version feels like it tracks a little more with like the retelling, but I'm going to keep going. Continuing the alternative version of the myth, Phaedra becomes distraught and depressed for several months due to dreadful longings for Hippolytus, and eventually unable to tolerate the burden of her suffering in silence, she confides in her nurse and shares her feelings towards Hippolytus. The nurse, who is concerned about the health of her mistress, tells Hippolytus about how Phaedra feels. Like, this is just so messy, you know? Bound by his oath of abstinence, Hippolytus rejects his stepmother. And when Phaedra learns of her nurse's actions, she fears the consequences of her immoral desires and plans to take her own life. But before doing so, she writes a letter to her husband Theseus. That one's a real tongue twister. I gotta be honest. Her husband Theseus, accusing Hippolytus of attempting to seduce her in an attempt to clear her name and possibly protect her children from misfortune. Similar to the ending of version 1, once Theseus reads Phaedra's letter and learns of his son's supposed sins, he prays to Poseidon to kill his son. And in a very similar fashion to the first tale, Poseidon summons a huge bull to scare Hippolytus's horses into a wild frenzy that kills him. However, in this version of the narrative, in this version of the narrative, the story does not end there. Artemis is saddened by the loss of her devout follower and reveals the truth to Theseus and about Aphrodite and the curse that she placed on his wife. The story ends with Theseus grieving over the death of his wife and son. And then Wikipedia goes on to say there's even more versions of the story. But that one is like, I feel like we can start to pick apart like bits and pieces of the retelling. Like there is this constant thing throughout the story where Phaedra and Hippolytus have this tension because he's so devout to only Artemis, and Phaedra keeps saying you have to honor all the gods, you have to pray to all the gods, you're going to anger the other gods, like as this warning. And then towards the end of the book, we see more and more. I feel like it zeroes in a little bit less of you're going to anger the other gods to you're going to anger Aphrodite, or in the audiobook, it's Aphrodite, where that name comes up more and more and more towards the end of the book. You're going to piss off Aphrodite. And which I didn't like. I had only read this classic version of the myth like 15 minutes ago. So I'm just like kind of in real time connecting the retelling strings, because in the traditional version of the myth is like Aphrodite canonically has cursed or bewitched Phaedra to have these feelings towards Hippolytus, where kind of keeping with the spirit of that but flipping it on its head is like that becomes the rumor told about Phaedra after all is said and done. Like that's what gets back about the story of like, oh my gosh, did you hear in Athens about Phaedra, where no one really knows about the trial, no one really knows what went down about the assault or any of that, but the rumor is, oh, Aphrodite may have cursed, this may have happened. So I thought it was an interesting way to like weave that in after the fact. But you know, all the little things are there. And the other piece of the myth is like, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, the nurse. So she has this nurse or maid who's with her and is like her confidant. And in our retelling, we have Kandaki, which is I think how that's said in, in the audiobook. So helpful. But Kandaki, who is originally like her mother's maid that travels with her from Crete to Athens to be like her one familiar face in this new place in her new life. At the beginning, bless you. At the beginning, Phaedra kind of has this internal monologue of like, like I don't have this rapport with Kandaki. I don't really know her like that. I wish I could have taken one of my own maids. But she knows that she was like her mother's most trusted maid, and I think is a little bit older, has been around for longer from when Phaedra was younger. So it makes sense that she would be that like nurse archetype, nurse and maid for Phaedra. And she does become slowly over time while Phaedra's in Athens. I feel like she is that confidant type of person for her when she feels very alone. I think that's a theme throughout also, is that Phaedra is very much so ignored by her husband Theseus, is really treated as like a nuisance more than anything. I don't think that they ever really interact as husband and wife whatsoever. They have separate quarters. They never do anything together, and they never speak together. She's ignored by most of court. She talks a lot about how she just feels so isolated and so like misunderstood by the other men at court. Even before she's assaulted, she just feels like no one takes her seriously. No one even calls her queen. They call her princess, or they call her just by her first name. And she has to kind of continue to like correct them. Even the other maids seem wary around her. She just feels very isolated. So Kandaki becomes this very important person to her, like by necessity. She's like, okay, I guess this is the one person who will talk to me and take me seriously and genuinely cares for my well-being. Which just sucks knowing how Kandaki's character arc ends. But we will get to official spoilers at some point. Let's see. Of all of the names had me confusing everyone. Yes, I would have made it more successfully through this if I had seen them spelled out. See, I think I feel the opposite. Like I was just flipping through because I read this on audio, and there's one that starts with an X. Where was it at the end? It's like the tribute at the very beginning, and then she has one more chapter at the end. Zenethiope in X. That makes, wow. I think that would have thrown me off more. Like it to me was nice knowing how to pronounce them, but for better or for worse, like they do all sound so similar. Like Theseus, that's the one that really gets me, which is like the shortest of all of them. But yeah, the Greek names are really a trip. A trip. I love the moment the first time someone called her princess and she was like, queen. Yes, like you see her develop this like gradual confidence, like very slowly. And I think it's just that she's starting to like lose her patience just as much as she's gaining confidence, because she feels so alone, she feels so isolated, and she's like, God damn it, like someone take me seriously. I'm the wife of the king. You know, like it's constant, and it's so obnoxious among so many other things that people just like are refusing to treat her with the respect that she like should have by default. Even during her trial, I think maybe Theseus is the one to like stand up for her at one point to say like, hey, that's your queen, because someone just addresses her as Phaedra. Do you have anything to say? And it's just like so jarring. Just the complete, constant, blatant, like lack of respect at all times. What's on my list? The difference between Crete and Athens is something that again, like I'm excited to read Ariadne, because Crete in this book is depicted in such a like more advanced way. They keep saying they have the technology to have like running water, and it's cleaner, and they just have like their court seems like has this general decorum. People are taken seriously. They like their palaces are different. Their art is different. They have all these different customs. It's like such a very different place, which then trying to research like what are these other myths involved in the story is King Minos of Crete, who's Phaedra's father, who is the son of Zeus, right? Because I think Phaedra is the granddaughter of Zeus, but King Minos, like his oldest son was killed in Athens or something, and that's why they institute the tribute system that we see at the beginning of the book, where they take these like tributes from Athens and send them into the labyrinth as this like annual ritual, where according to the classic myth, those are like straight up sacrifices to the Minotaur. But in Phaedra, it's like the tributes arrive very, very kind of afraid and unsure. They're like, well, I'm a tribute this year, don't know what, fate awaits me. And I think it's some of the guards at the palace in Crete are like, low key, just find a quiet corner and sit there all night, and we'll go in, escort you out at the end of the night. And it seems like there's this like mythos that like, oh, the Minotaur is such a monster. The Minotaur is so scary. He's like this like unnatural creature that is underground, is in the dark, has this like hunger for human flesh or whatever. When we learn, or we are told over the course of the book, that the Minotaur just has this deformity, or the king was just ashamed of having him as a son, so they like banished him. But Phaedra and Ariadne were, constantly in the labyrinth and constantly spending time with their brother. And it was just this like very confusing conglomeration of like facts and events. And that part was strange to me. Like I just couldn't fully grasp like why, like was the king just embarrassed of this son? That felt like a weak spot in the book to me. Like we were supposed to have this sympathy for the Minotaur and for the queen, who's like lost both of her sons basically, or has this reputation that she had a bastard or something like that. But I didn't quite buy it. Like we have this tribute system, we send them into the labyrinth. They're supposed to emerge unscathed, yet Theseus goes in there with the assistance of Ariadne, allegedly, and drops the dead Minotaur, on the ground outside of the labyrinth. And that's like what kicks off everything. That's like chapter 1, I think. Very Hunger Games vibes. Yes, that's funny. Yeah, I think it was probably like calling them tributes and like sending them into this dangerous place. Like, good luck. I did have that thought too, but because I just needed more explanation. Like, I don't know, the tribute system, like we take these tributes from Athens as like a debt for the death of the king's first son. But then was it said what usually happens to them? Or do they just get lost on their own? Like what happens to them if all of these tributes emerge from the maze safely every year, which is what I feel like we're supposed to believe, right? Like if they all come out alive every year, like why is it a scary thing? I'm kind of turning myself around about the labyrinth thing, but we definitely are supposed to feel like the Minotaur is misunderstood and feel very sympathetic for him, and his relationship with his sisters is like they apparently know the labyrinth in and out like the back of their hand. Phaedra goes in to try and like search and rescue some of the tributes that are stuck in there. She's like, no, don't worry, like I know this place better than anyone. Ariadne is mysteriously nowhere to be found, except that Theseus has the golden ball of thread, which is like the key part of Ariadne's myth, I want to say. I remember the tribute character saying they're told, oh, okay, so I guess it is known. Oh, no, you're right. It's like she says it or the guard tells them no one has died recently. I'm also confused. I know maybe it's like a status thing. Like, oh, if you're chosen as a tribute, no one has died. It's like maybe like a formality something. It was positioned in like a certain way that it's like this is a part of the culture in Crete, because they also have their like bull jumpers, like they have all these like customs, which is funny to me because not funny, but we're in Crete for such a small amount of time in the very beginning of the book, and I felt like I had such a better sense of place in Crete than I did Athens at all. Like Athens to me was just described as like, oh, it's like dusty and there's lots of loud men. And and it's like they don't have the running water. I really miss the running water that we had in Crete. That's all I felt like I really grasped about the setting being in Athens. And then our one, like that tribute character, she has her final chapter at the end where she's like reflecting on how she no longer lives in Athens, but she's from there, and is saying like, wow, one day I'll be buried away from my homeland now that I live in Crete, but I'm okay with that. My family is here, etc. But I still didn't feel like we got so much about the culture of Crete. I just didn't feel like we got the same about the culture in Athens besides the super obvious. Oh, hey, welcome. We have mostly been monologuing about the differences between the retelling aspects and the traditional myth according to Wikipedia. There's like two versions. There's like Phaedra had this crush on Hippolytus and then he rejected her. And the other version is Phaedra was virtuous, but because of Hippolytus's commitment to only Artemis, Aphrodite got jealous and placed a curse on Phaedra to like try and seduce Hippolytus, and then like other things happen. So those are like kind of the two versions of the original myth, and then the retelling aspect is kind of what we're getting at. But then we got sidetracked talking about the Minotaur and the labyrinth, and you came at a great point. Or just it's kind of just retelling soup, I think, just as it comes to me. But the retelling wise, I don't know, because like I was saying before, I'm not super familiar with this particular myth, and I'll be really excited again to read Ariadne. I don't know. It was fun. It was like almost just reading like Greek vibes because I'm not familiar with the original. But now piecing it together after the fact, I feel like it's bringing my appreciation up a little bit. I think I'm going to give this a 3 stars. It felt kind of middle of the road for me. I know it was a debut. It was a good retelling I think, but not like my favorite one. But I think talking it through with the different myth elements is giving me a better idea overall. The tribute character doesn't have other chapters. I thought I was listening to her voice a bunch. Oh, I think she's only, yeah, what's her name? Her name is the X name because Zenethipede. So she has like the very last chapter, and I think she has 1 or 2 chapters in the beginning. There's a lot of like little one-off chapters. There's like the Bard who's in like the very beginning. There's the oh yeah, Zenethipede. There's the Bull Jumper that we have for like 1 or 2 chapters. There's Trousseau? No. What's his name? The King's Advisor. He's a whole character. What is his name? Truffaut. Truffaut is the King's Advisor. And then there's Medea, who was a little bit confused about her presence in the book. She's like the wife of Hippolytus's, no, Theseus's father, like the king before was Medea. No, I don't know. Someone explained to me who Medea was, because she's like this like spooky witchy person who the rumor about her is that she killed her children, and she's like Phaedra's cousin somehow, like a godly cousin maybe. I don't know. I was confused about Medea. But then we also have Kandaki, who is Phaedra's maid, who is like her mother's maid, queen in Crete, who then went with Phaedra to Athens. I think those are all the POVs, but it still felt like a lot of POVs. Obviously, it's all Phaedra's fault. Yeah, the original myth is very much like Phaedra made shit up because she was embarrassed, which is not my favorite myth, right? So just on that fact alone, I appreciate that there's like a retelling kind of like vindicating her, like what if she wasn't making it up and none of these men in court were giving her the time of day or believed her at all. So the myth has just been perpetuated as like, oh, she lied, but like what if someone took her seriously, and then like that's what we got. So I really like the idea, because the original myth is very much like, well, she was embarrassed about being rejected, so she made up this horrible lie, and it's like, ooh, yikes, I hate that. I read Ariadne a few years ago, and that definitely helped. Okay, see, Ariadne, Wes bought it for me when we were on vacation like 2 years ago, and I haven't read it. So it's on the list, and I kept thinking about it while reading this, because before you got here, I was saying like Ariadne in this book was there for just such a brief time, and then it's like, well, what happened to her? Like at first we're told, oh, she disappeared because Dionysus fell in love with her and swept her away to Olympus. And then we get a little bit more information on maybe what really happened later on. But I'm so curious to get the full story of Ariadne, because it felt like her story ended very quickly, and she was such a cool, interesting, spunky character. Phaedra was a little bit of a wet blanket, I'm not gonna lie. I just wasn't crazy about her personality. She just felt, I don't know, she didn't really have much of a chance. Like no one was really there for her to bounce off of, character-wise. But she just wasn't the most interesting to me. She just was a little bit of a kind of a wallflower who just happened to become a queen. But I would love to read more about Ariadne. Is that her sassy cousin? Yes, she was sassy. She gave me, I almost said Ursula from The Little Mermaid, but that's not quite right. Like she just was this kind of like take no shit, like witchy lady in the shadows. What's that reminding me of? Maybe like Maleficent, because she's kind of like outcast and no one really is supposed to know that she's still around. Maybe I'm thinking of Maleficent. I did like her chapters. I liked her as a character. She felt like at least she had some personality, but I don't really know how she fit all into the puzzle other than she was her cousin, and her backstory about her children kind of fed into this like overall theme of the treatment of children throughout the book. And she was kind of a pawn in the end with Truffaut's plot with like that the whole last 10% of the book. Medea finally was like useful to the main plot of the book, but I don't know. I was a little bit confused about her presence overall, but not enough for me to be like upset about it. Because she was a fun character to read from. Jennifer Saint had a new release yesterday. Hold on. Jennifer Saint. Is it? Oh, Atalanta. Is that the one? Is that one like a novella? Atalanta. The story of a woman who refuses to be contained. It's flip-flopped in Ariadne. Phaedra is the firecracker and Ariadne is bland. What? Why can't we have... Oh, that is so wild. I want a main character with some spunk. You know? I'm tired of these like white bread main characters. Okay. Atalanta. I love the art style of Jennifer Saint's books, which I haven't read any of. Because she has what's the one we just talked about? Ariadne, and she has Electra, and now Atalanta. I think those are, is that her only three? When Princess Atalanta is born, a daughter rather than the son her parents hoped for, she's left on a to die. Huh. I mean, great. The two like big names in like Greek mythology retellings that I haven't read is Jennifer Saint, and I still haven't read Natalie Haynes either, because I want to read Stone Blind because it's Medusa, which is like so cool. And I think Stone Blind was on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, but I could be thinking of a different Greek retelling also. I think it was that one though. And then her other one is A Thousand Ships, which is about the Trojan War, the women in the Trojan War, which is so similar to the book I always talk about, Daughters of Sparta, which is about the women in the Trojan War that I love so much. So it's like all of these, you know, Greek myth books that are on my list. But those two I know are so well beloved, and I haven't read any of either of their books yet. Atalanta should follow Jason in the Argonauts. Medea should hopefully make an appearance. The funniest thing about Greek myths is that you have all these characters with these very like Greek sounding names, and then you also have Jason. It just makes me laugh. Like it is what it is. I just love this cover so much. This cover of Atalanta looks like Meg from Hercules, but with a bow and arrow. That's just the vibes that I get off the cover alone. Where's my list? This is why I made a list, because I knew if I was going solo, I would be all over the place. Okay, maybe you guys can help me with this, because something that is said frequently throughout the book about Theseus is he felt like a wishy-washy character to me too. I couldn't really get a grasp on how I felt about him or what his personality really was. But also, he's supposed to be like the father of democracy, which is part of his myth, according to the brief Googling that I've done. It's like, Theseus has established democracy in Athens or whatever, but I just don't know what the motivation for that was. Like, why did this man, is he truly just so thinks himself so noble that he just doesn't want to be king on principle. Like on principle, he wants to establish a different, like let the people rule themselves with democracy. I just have a hard time buying that. I don't feel like we got enough context to really unpack that and make me believe that of his character, other than maybe how his father came into power. He makes some comment at some point about Hippolytus, like, or someone makes a comment to him, like, oh, you know, if you go down and establish this democracy thing, then Hippolytus won't be your heir anymore. And Theseus is kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, he's going to have to make his own way. I don't know. I just don't know if I buy it, that he just was like this, like, oh no, the monarchy should die with me. The people don't need a king. The people should rule themselves. It just feels like what? Why would he just do that? Maybe I'm just cynical. I just didn't really believe that from him from the get-go. Also, is the myth of the ship of Theseus the same guy? Because we didn't get any of the ship of Theseus. I'm sure he's a very complicated man with many different stories. Ship of Theseus myth. But like, what's the original myth about it? Ship of Theseus. The ship wherein Theseus and the youth of Athens returned from Crete, had 30 oars, and was preserved by the Athenians down even to the time of Demetrius, for they took away all the old planks as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timbers in their places. Oh, so maybe it's like it happened after Theseus's time. Like he was seen as such a hero of Athens that they preserved his ship, and then as it began to break down over time, they replaced it, and then the paradox idea was born. I'm gonna have to look at that later, but the ship of Theseus, like as a philosophical idea, is so interesting to me that I kept waiting for it to come up, and then it didn't. But if it's like a history thing, like after the time of Theseus, that makes more sense. Thank you for going down that rabbit hole with me. Can't remember the whole backstory, but he started out as a poor bastard child and worked his way up to being a hero guy. Yeah, that was like, there was something like that. Like the king, his father, the king before him or something, jumped off a cliff when he thought that Theseus had died in Crete. But it was like something about how he had come to power, or Theseus was a bastard, or something like that. That, yeah, gave him this like almost like noble chip on his shoulder of like, well, if I can do it, everyone deserves the chance to do it. I don't know, which is like, I guess that makes more sense than just feeling like out of nowhere, I'm gonna abdicate so you guys can vote for stuff now, which would feel like a reach. But if he has more of a backstory like that, I guess that makes more sense, according to the myth, but it wasn't really explored. There was some of it, like when they were on the boat coming back into Athens, I think there was like just a little tiny brief info dump, and it was not enough for me to remember. But I remember that it was there a little bit, I think. Maybe I should go back and look at it, because it was talking about his father, and I think that's where it was all described, but that felt like a little bit of a weak spot for me. It's like I wanted to know why he was so dead set on establishing this democracy when he had a son. Like he had a son who would have been an heir. Like it would have just been easy to be king and, and just fuck off, you know? But I don't know. I think that's gonna bug me. I'm probably gonna do some more Googling about it, because that one's gonna stick around in my head. But yeah, I mean, if he came from rags to riches, that does make more sense to me also. Man, I had a thread just a second ago. I feel like we have talked about a lot of things except for the actual plot of the book, which is Phaedra's assault that happens. And so much of the book centers around like the trial that happens when she goes and says, hey, this is fucked up, this is what happened to me, and she gets put on trial as kind of this plot from Truffaut, who is almost using her and like using her accusation in a way to point to Theseus to say, hey, this is the system that you're advocating for, and me, Truffaut, the advisor to the king, who's very comfortable being the advisor to the king in a monarchy, is going to use this trial and accusation against the queen, against your son, your potential heir, to demonstrate why you should not have a democracy. And that backfires in a couple of ways, one of which being Truffaut ends up developing this like very earnest fondness for Phaedra and like wanting to like take her in and take care of her. So we see him become very torn and like wanting to keep the monarchy as it is, but also wanting Phaedra to be okay and to find justice. But the other consequences, like, well, spoilers, but Phaedra wins the trial, and all of the men at the trial cast their votes, and they find Hippolytus guilty of raping Phaedra, which is like the grand deviation from the classic myth that she, accuses him, and that it's widely believed to just be like a lie because she's embarrassed about trying to seduce him or like having these feelings for him. So that's the main like retelling aspect. And in this, grand deviation and also show of justice, these men and friends of Hippolytus do find him to be guilty of this crime. In the other twist, I guess, to the original myth is that Phaedra is pregnant throughout the trial. And it's like very clearly established that her and Theseus have never once like consummated their marriage. They sleep in very different quarters. They rarely even interact with each other. So there's like no chance whatsoever that the baby could be anyone's except for Hippolytus from the assault. And so she's like so obviously very pregnant during the trial that's like an element of the trial is, well, one, it's like I got pregnant somehow. And it's like the stipulation is like, well, couldn't it be your husband, the king's? But it seems like it's kind of an open secret that that's not really something that's happening, even though Theseus comes to Phaedra to make like a plea deal, I guess, to say like, if you call this off, I will claim this child as my own, as like a legitimate, like my legitimate son. And she's like, no, I'd rather have justice. And we all say, you go, girl. But so that's like a piece of the story that I guess just like is undeniable evidence. Like she is super pregnant, but also part of the retelling element is that she, like the classic myth is that Phaedra has two sons by Theseus, which is interesting because when she first realizes she's pregnant and then becomes very pregnant, she describes herself as being very large. She's like, even for my first pregnancy, this feels like a big pregnancy. And she wonders, is there more than one baby in there? Which I think it was just a throwaway mention, but I just remember it because I also remember Phaedra in the classic myth having two sons. So that may have just been the call, like to tie in, like, oh, maybe those are the two sons. Whereas if she would have accepted Theseus's plea, that she could have possibly, we're really speculating here, maybe those that would have been twins, Theseus would have like validated them as his sons, and those would have been like, for all of history's concern, those would have been the sons of Theseus, right? But obviously that's not how it went in our retelling. But like the feminist skew of this retelling in particular, I did appreciate. It very much was like, believe women, believe victims. This like justice was found for Phaedra in the end, even though it was like not a happy ending for much of anyone in the end, which I think we should talk about. Maybe it's too late to put up a little spoilers banner, but I'm going to do it just in case, since we're talking about the ending. Do we have thoughts about after the verdict to the end of the book? And while we're establishing our thoughts, I also want to mention before I forget, what did you think of the little interludes of the night chorus throughout the book? Because I have to tell you, from the audiobook experience, they were really strange. It just was like very echoey, like they were being like read simultaneously by a few different like voice actors. But them being in the book, I appreciated. I thought it was like a unique way to like echo the women's, like the unseen, unheard, common women's voices and stories, just like little sprinkles and breadcrumbs. But the actual experience of the little interlude night chorus elements was like a bizarre. It took me out of it every time because it was like 4 people reading at once. But I did like that it was in there. The ending itself was just like everything coming together about Truffaut and Medea and Kandaki, which like I forgot to mention that part. Kandaki is like going to testify as a witness because the men in the trial are like, well, surely after the assault, someone must have seen you bruised and battered and covered in dirt and mud. So who would have helped you like clean up after that? And so they bring in Kandaki to basically say like, yeah, I can confirm that was the case, but then she's just accused of like lying for her mistress, and then she is brutalized and has her tongue ripped out, and then her body is like staged in Phaedra's chambers, which is like a really brutal way for Kandaki to go. And I couldn't find anything about that in the classic myths at all. So I don't know. It was like a wild extra addition to the story. But I mean, like, then again, also the whole being on trial, like putting Hippolytus on trial, I think is like the retelling element. So just the choice to have Kandaki testify and then also be killed for it was a lot. I'm not gonna lie, that was a lot. But I mean, it added to Phaedra's arc in a big way. It was like the consequences of seeking justice for herself. It's like, well, like, well, you know, I lost someone else that was really important to me in the process. Like, she feels very conflicted and like carries this guilt about it. But at the same time, I don't know that it was necessary, but I digress. I read it physically and I really liked the night chorus interlude. I wonder if I could find one. It's so hard to explain how the experience of that in the audiobook, because I kept thinking it must have like an interesting text format or something. Act 2. I'm so curious. Night chorus. Oh, it's like a poem. Like, it's like a normal poem. Yeah, I don't know why that needed to be read by a few different people at the same time. But yeah, I like that it's in there because the characters even reference the existence of the night chorus a few times, and it's like this open acknowledgement that there are other women suffering the same thing, but they're not queens. They're like maids and common women. Like, that's kind of a thread throughout. It's like, well, who's going to take us seriously. Like where is the rest of the justice, which was, you know, devastating and real. But there's also a moment where I think it's Kandaki who's in the laundry room and the maids are like, oh, you work for Queen Phaedra. Like, why is she doing this? Like, this is bad for all of us. We're all feeling the repercussions because she's seeking justice. And Kandaki is like, well, don't you think that since she is seeking justice and making these claims, that don't you think someone might take you seriously too if she finds justice? Then don't you think that sets precedent that you could also? And I don't know that that was ever like really wrapped up in a satisfactory way, but I appreciated that the conversation was there. The ending with Truffaut plotting because Phaedra wins the trial, and then she like finds out that Hippolytus is not going to be punished. He's going to be briefly exiled to the Amazons, where she's like, oh, my convicted rapist is going to be sent to a all-women community who is not told anything about the trial or about his conviction. And he's just going to be able to do whatever he wants, presumably, in that community. Phaedra's like, I cannot let that happen. So in this like just like waking lucid dream of rage, she finds her like axe that she brought with her from Crete and like marches her way down to the ocean. And this is where the end of the myth of Hippolytus comes to fruition in the retelling. Like, it's a little bit fuzzy in my brain. It happened so fast. She sees Hippolytus, and then in his shock, like there's like some intervention or something that happens where he stumbles, falls, dies. There may or may not be a giant bull that emerges from the ocean, like the classic myth. And then Phaedra is looking at him with his broken neck and slices his head off his body with the axe, and then wakes up pregnant and chained to her bed. And it's like, oh, you're going to have this baby, and then we're going to kill you. And that baby will be the heir. Like, Theseus will take that baby as his new heir since Hippolytus has died. And Truffaut, the advisor to the king, decides, well, you know, I bet I can squirrel her away and keep her safe, tell people she's my niece, like on my own property. So he concocts this whole scheme. He tells Medea, look, you have to tell her that this is the deal, which is a horrible deal. It's like, you give birth to your baby, give it to Theseus, and we will send you back to Crete. And Phaedra's like, did not go through all of bullshit trial, everything, just to be separated from my kid. So Medea's like, well, I tried. Medea goes away. Then Truffaut is like, well, she was just faced with this bad option. Now she's more likely to say yes to my good option, which he was going to go to her and say, listen, we're going to sneak you off to my private property. Don't even worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. And before he can do that, he's summoned by the king. He's like taken away, so he can't get to her in time. And in the meantime, Phaedra is reflecting on Medea's actions and story as a mother, where the story of Medea is like, she killed her children. She killed her children. And that's why people are afraid of her and think of her as a witch. And Medea eventually is like, no one ever asked why I did it, because there are some things that are worse than death. And she talks to Phaedra about that. And Phaedra is lying there chained and realizes there are some things worse than death. And the in her mind, like the most, the only escape that she sees for her and her child is like, we just have to die. Otherwise, like, there are things that could be worse than that. So she somehow convinces like one of the guards to go in and offer her like water or wine or something. And it somehow, while chained to the bed, takes this guard's sword and slits her own throat. also a very, very hardcore thing to do. And Truffaut, like, you know, who had been moments away from basically like trying to go to her rescue, is like more devastated, like finds out with Theseus or just before Theseus, and then has to summon the king into Phaedra's chambers with her there, like lying dead. And Truffaut is grappling with how devastated he really is, how close he really is to having like saved her. And Theseus is like piecing it all together in that moment and realizing, oh, you cared about her a lot more than you should have, maybe more than he even realized. And also realizing like you had a scheme and you're the advisor to the king, but why do you care about what happens to the queen who killed my son or who accused my son, or et cetera, et cetera. It's a very messy, very quick ending. And then after all that, it's like, remember that tribute at the very beginning who entered the labyrinth, who then Phaedra goes into the labyrinth to like escort out to safety. It's like travel all the way back to Crete. She's the one the book ends on, and it's her reflecting on like her husband, who is like a guard or something, comes home and is like, hey, I got some news. Remember Phaedra? Word on the street is she died, and the rumors are wild. And this person, Zine something, is the one that starts with an X. I keep forgetting what it actually is. That's the author's note. It is Zenethipede. Zenethipede is like whole final end chapter of reflecting on like the impact that people can have on you, like having a family and being like having status versus having stability. And it's like a very interesting way to end the book. It's not how I would have thought that the book would have ended, and in the strangest way, I felt like it just wrapped everything up so nicely. It really worked. It really worked to come all the way back to that character we hadn't seen in like 200 pages. But I liked it. It like surprised me. It just felt, it like didn't wrap everything up super cleanly. It just felt like a good, nice way to say like, these are kind of all the themes that we touched on, which was like safety and family and status and like the sense of place, feeling alone in a place that you are not familiar with, like all of those little things, threads of fate, young children, like all of that kind of was touched on right at the end with a character we barely saw. And I really liked that. And I want to say that is the end of my monologue. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, because we just rehashed like the whole last chunk of the book. But I think, honestly, just like talking about it for the last hour made me realize kind of some different thoughts about it, because reading it and just thinking about it the last couple of days has been like, I don't know, it was okay. But I feel more highly about it now than I did an hour ago. So, thanks for being there for that journey. Would love to know if you have other thoughts about it, if you have completely opposite thoughts than I did about it. That's all good and valid. Housekeeping stuff before I get out of here is tomorrow also is book club for the Bandit Queens, the same time at 6 PST. It won't be just me. I'll be with Hannah from the Paperback Bruncher and Jan from Jan Agaton to talk about Bandit Queens. And then the month of May, our book read is YN by Esther Yee. Y/N or Your Name by Esther Yee, which is different than what I posted on my community tab, because I don't know. I forgot that May was a thing, I guess. And then our June pick is Scorched Grace, which is the like orange and purple cover with the nun, which is the book that I just said the other day was our May read. That's wrong. Don't listen to me. The May pick is Your Name. The June read is Scorched Grace. And I think we are just about caught up. I think we're about caught up. because this is our March read. And we did it, we read it, we unpacked. Thank you for being here. Whether you read it today and hung out today with me, or you read it after the live show and are now just here listening to my monologue, appreciate you nonetheless. A quote that really stuck out to me was Truffaut. She killed the man he could have become, all the men he could have become. Yeah, there was some interesting, like, I mean, that's something we hear a lot in like these like rape or assault cases, is like from the abuser, right? It's like, oh, why are you ruining his life? And it's like, well, whoa, you know, what about all of the harm and abuse that he's caused that he's facing justice for? They're like those very things that we see brought up and rehashed again and again in modern like abuse cases. It was a little bit like jarring to see them also like mirrored and reflected in this like ancient Greek mythological retelling, but also like oddly validating. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, these are conversations that like constantly come up that we can constantly fight back on. Give me exactly. It's like, why are you ruining this young man's life? Like, whoa, like let's walk that back. Like, don't go there. I will also be finishing Bandit Queens tomorrow, so we are in that together. I think I have like, let's check. I think I have 4 hours left on the audiobook, so that will be a tonight and tomorrow morning on my commute journey. Okay, I have 5 hours left, so that's a real tomorrow project. But I was just talking to Jan earlier today, and I think she also still has yet to finish it. So we'll be like quietly, secretly marathoning all together. I will also be pushing through Bandit Queens for tomorrow. That one's a little easier to follow on audio, so see you there. Yeah, I'm also reading that one on audio. That's been my journey this week. Very much enjoying it so far, with a few hours yet to go. But it's been a nice like breather from, I've read some like heavier books recently, and Bandit Queens is like this like nice little refreshing brevity. So that will be fun. If you're reading Bandit Queens, I'll see you tomorrow. Sunday's decided to make her appearance. Excellent. Well, thanks for hanging out with me on this, you know, chill little Wednesday night. And I will see you tomorrow or around on the internet. Love you. Bye.